You know, Kayla, I think this is going to be one of the most important shows we've done. Trim and trimscaping completely changes a house. It gives it that magical effect.
It really does.
There's so many art forms that really go into the molding and the different styles and designs, and the people who apply it to the houses is fantastic.
It really is. And Kayla, really, do you use all this?
Absolutely. There's going to be things for baseboard and casing. We have crown molding, chair rails. I mean, you can use it everywhere.
Yeah, it's right true. Izzy, what are you doing?
Well, you know, I've always had a bit of a green thumb, and you guys said we were going to do some planting of trim today, so I figured to get a head start.
You know what?
I don't think he gets it.
I don't think he does.
I don't think he gets it at all.
Oh, well, we'll
JR,
tell him later.
it's going to be an exciting day. We get to take the tools out.
I know, I always like getting my hands dirty. I'm excited to talk about trim today.
Trim, all sorts of the joints, butt joints, miter joints, coping joints.
It's going to be great. I'm excited.
Izzy, what are you doing over there?
Well, like JR, I'm not scared to get my hands dirty. Like I said, we're going to do some planting trim today, so I've got the head start here to get it going.
I did say planting trim. Should we tell him?
You know you got to be more specific with him.
All right, well, hey, why don't we go get those blue pants of yours? A little dusty.
All right, I like it.
Lonnie, I'm so excited for today. We're talking about trim. It's probably one of my favorite topics when it comes to new construction and building a home.
I love trim. And what do you got there?
Well, I have some crown molding. I have some baseboard. What do you have?
I have a piece of fluted casing. You can see the little crevices there. That's beautiful stuff. We've been using that for a long, long time. And then this is reeded crown molding.
Oh, sure. I see that.
You put it up between the wall and the ceiling. It's beautiful stuff. You can paint it or stain it. A lot of things that we can put in these homes today that we call trimscaping and planting trim. And
a lot of detail. What is going on? Izzy.
What is so confusing? I am planting trim.
Oh.
We don't want to burst your bubble, but just throw everything down and follow us, because on today's show, we're going to talk about trimming homes and actually what planting is when it comes to trim.
I think what I've done
let's go.
is plenty nice. I think we're going to be very well pleased with it. Luke, you said we were planting trim. I was simply planting trim.
I did say that, but Izzy only planted like 3 inches deep. What'd you expect? It was going to blow over.
You know, guys, today's show is probably one of the most important features of a home, and we're going to be talking about trim. What it does, it's got a magical effect. It solves what we call the empty box syndrome, and it really gives a home character.
Yeah, Tony, it gives it identity, it gives it beauty. We're doing a lot of open concepts, so it helps define some spaces and kind of provides a punctuation point on a lot of these homes.
Yeah.
Well, hey, let's start the show.
Okay.
Welcome to Between the Studs. I'm Lonnie Norris, and this is part of my co-workers at Granite Ridge Builders, including Tony Ranke, our president. We enjoy coming into your home and talking about the processes and all that's involved in the complex subject, really in a lot of ways, of building a custom home today. We like what we're doing, and today the subject is trim, and what planting trim really is it hanging there? That's what we're going to do. But hey, going back to the 1900s, you know, we were blessed with a lot of kind of new styles of homes that were coming on board, and a lot of those homes were highlighted by the trim they placed in it. And back then, trim was big, it was heavy, it was dark, ornate. But by the 1930s, things began to really, really change. Things became more minimalistic. We used clamshell and ranch. The idea was not to highlight an area of the house, but just to cover up the cracks in the corners. And that's kind of where it stayed for a long, long time. But today, it's a lot different. That's what we want to talk about.
Yeah, guys, and my favorite stage of building a house is actually the trim stage, because that's the first time you actually start to see some of the finished pieces go into it. And the thing that I love is the tools we use, but not only the tools, but the techniques that we use to plant the trim, which essentially means hang the trim, because you can change the style drastically by if we miter it versus butting those joints. So just some of those different techniques can really change how the house looks.
And trim is everywhere in the home. Think about it. It's around your doors, your windows, your openings, your mantle, your kitchen cabinets, columns, cornice, crown molding, everywhere.
And when you're talking about that base and casing going around those doors and windows, you really need to take a look at those profiles that are happening. Because when you're looking at a window, there's actually 4 sides of the trim you're seeing, where it's more of the base around the floor, you're really only going to see 3 sides.
I have to say my favorite subject has to be the wall treatments when it comes to trim. So we're doing a lot of wall treatments when it comes to wainscoting and paneling, shiplap. You know, it didn't become popular until plaster was popular in the 1700s. When they had bare walls of plaster, they wanted to dress it up a little bit. So that's when they introduced paneling in about the 1750s. So it's really exciting where it's come. It used to be very ornate. We're getting a little bit simpler with shiplap. There's so many different styles that can really define your home.
And discussing trim wouldn't be complete without talking about color or stain. Monochromatic is kind of the more modern, and of course the traditional is, of course, still very popular. And actually, I tend to prefer the more traditional.
I think we've shown our audience there is a very complex subject. We're going to try to simplify it. We're going to give you some terms. We're also going to show you ways that we're talking about all this trim. So let's all pick our parts and stay tuned. You're going to like the show.
Did you see that Jay-Z actually had
Poor guy.
Well, you know, Kayla, on the subject of trim, there's a lot of different terms that we need to really talk about. And one of them would be trim, which normally is a reference to the woodworking, or it doesn't necessarily have to be wood, but the woodworking or whatever it is that accents or protects the border or the edge or joint in a building or a home.
Now there's another term very similar to trim work and we hear a lot is molding. So
Right.
molding is a long, narrow, ornamental surface with uniform cross sections. So that's going to provide light, shades, and shadows. You know, a simple way to put it is just an ornate finishing.
I've seen some of those long pieces. Sometimes they're 15, 16, 18 feet long, aren't they?
Absolutely. And now there's a couple different ways that you could even spell molding too. We get into M-O-L-D, or the more British way would be M-O-U-L-D, just like color.
Okay. Also, we made fun of Izzy about how we assemble trim or we attach trim. We use the word planting in our industry. I think he's going to understand that by the end of the show today. But anyway, we use that word to talk about how we attach the trim or the molding to the proper place in the home. And we sometimes use nails and glue or staples. I think they're going to talk about that a little later.
Now another part of that has to do with the jamb too. Explain what that is and how that correlates with planting.
The jamb is not something you put on your peanut butter. No, it's actually the opening, the door opening or the window opening where the trim is applied or planted.
Absolutely. Now, there's 4 very important points to apply the molding. We have baseboard. So baseboard is going to be the trim that goes at the bottom between the floor and the wall, and that's going to be covering up gaps there.
And we have a lot of different varieties of baseboard, right? From little 2-inch stuff to all the way up to whatever.
We're going to get into a lot of detail about that really
good.
soon here in the show. The next one is going to be casing. So casing simply refers to any sort of molding or trim work that surrounds a door jamb or a door area or a window.
And in a way, it kind of encases that door jamb or window, doesn't it?
Exactly. So that's casing.
Okay.
And then we also have cornice. So cornice is going to be between the ceiling and the wall. That joint right there is cornice. Now we a lot of times refer to cornice crown molding because it's up in the corner or up in that crease up there.
Such a beautiful addition to a home when you add some of that molding at the ceiling level.
And there's so many different ways to do it. We'll also talk a lot of detail about the crown molding and cornice later.
And I think a little later, Izzy and Luke are going to talk about joints. And basically, that's where 2 pieces of molding come together. There's a lot of different things to think about. And you haven't probably thought about some of these. And we're going to talk about joints and also how we cut the trim in a new home today.
I'm going to go get set up for talking about wallscaping, my favorite subject. That's the treatment of the trim on the wall. But I think Izzy and Luke are going to be ready to talk about theirs, so let's go to them first.
I love this stuff. This reminds me of shop class and getting to do all kinds of woodwork. This is just awesome. Now, I do need to apologize because I really didn't understand that when we talked about planting trim, we weren't talking about anything in the garden. I'm sorry, but hey, I couldn't have been the only person who's not known that terminology.
Yeah, it's one that confuses a lot of people. So we use the term planting rather than hanging because if you hang something, think of like hanging a picture, or out in the field we hang siding. But the siding is still loose so it can expand and contract with weather. A picture is usually, very easy to pull a picture off. When you plant a trim piece on the wall, it is there. You need a crowbar or a hammer to pull that thing off. So we want to make sure it is applied very, very tough.
Well, that makes sense. Now, you were messing around with this saw. What are you typically doing with this kind of saw?
Yeah, so this is a combine miter saw, and basically what it does is it can cut 45 degrees. And there's more, but there's typically 3 joints that you'll see out on our job sites when it comes to trim. And that's where we're either going around a corner or bringing 2 pieces of trim together. So one of the ones that we see most often is called a miter. And that's essentially when you have 2 pieces of trim coming together and you'll cut a 45 on each one, put them together, 2 45s equals a 90, and that's what allows you to get around that corner, like at a corner of a doorway, for example.
Yeah.
Another one would be a butt joint. Butt joint is literally just cutting 2 pieces and putting them together just like that. So 2 90-degree cuts, straight cuts, you butt them together, and that's why it's called a butt joint. So now the third one is probably the most complicated of them all. And this is one that really sets apart a good trimmer from maybe a trimmer that's maybe not quite as seasoned, and that's called a cope cut. And a cope cut, as you can see here, it actually mimics the profile of the trim. So what we do here is we actually cut it on a back 45, then we come in here with a coping saw, which you guys might be familiar with what that looks like, and it comes in here and it's just for delicate cutting, and you can see that profile goes right along there, so that way when it butts up to another piece of trim, it actually will hug that and fit very, very nicely. And what's nice about that is we're dealing with wood most of the time when it comes to trim. So it expands and contracts. Well, this, when it expands and contracts with a cope joint, you actually run this against your eyesight and you actually won't see that expanding and contracting. If you did 2 45s, that's when you'll notice that they're pulling apart.
So when we're doing planting, what are the different ways that you would fasten things?
Yeah, well, one of them is what you're holding on to right there is a trim gun. And again, depending on the size, the thickness, where we're planting the trim, whether it be door, a base, crown mold, all depends on the fastener we use. Crown, you typically use staples. Doors, you're using more of a 16 gauge fastener, which is thicker, a little bit more heavy duty. And then maybe some of those intricate pieces around cabinetry, you're going to be using a much thinner, smaller piece of nail. So that way it doesn't split out and it hides a little bit better. And
to try to avoid a nasty mistake like I had this morning with terminology, what is back banding?
Great question. Back banding is when you have a piece of casing and you actually bring in another piece and you apply it right to the back side of that. Okay. So it goes from maybe a 3/4 inch to maybe a true 4-inch piece of casing. Adds a lot more shadow lines. And again, depending on the style you're looking for, adding a piece of back banding can really make it go from one style to the next. And it's not only for casing, it could be for base. There's base cap, base shoe, shoe mold, a lot of different parts and pieces. That trim can be very easy, very simple, or it can be very complex, but it gives it a nice sharp look.
And when I look at the back of it, it looks like there's an indentation on the back as well. What's that for?
Yeah, a lot of the trim that you'll see has that, and I'll show you on this piece of base here. It's a little bit more noticeable, but this is called a kerf cut. And I mentioned with wood, it will expand and contract depending on this time of season, and there's moisture in wood. Now, we have all of our wood is kiln dried, but that's going to shrink it down to about 8% moisture, and it'll reach equilibrium. But this will allow it so that if there's any expansion and contraction of this, it'll actually expand and contract back to the wall, as opposed to away from the wall, so you don't get that unsightly gap between the base and the wall. So that's what that kerf there is for. Larger pieces, sometimes you'll see 2 kerf cuts in it.
Well, how about we take a trip back to shop class? Can I go ahead and operate this thing?
Yeah, why not? Let's give it a go.
All right, fingers safe, right?
Yep, right, keep them away.
All right, let's go for it. Woo! Yeah!
Lonnie, when it comes to building a home, we're finding out more and more that there are historical things and reasons why we have all these pieces and parts, and that includes the base.
You're right, Tony. A lot of things to think about. You know, back in the mid-1800s, plaster was the typical wall finish, and floors were wood, and so people mopped their floors. Well, to protect the walls and to cover the joint, they put in this board they called, or molding they called, a mop board. And some of it was pretty big and ornate.
So why would we even need this now, since baseboards or mop boards as they were back then, I don't use a mop in my house.
Well, again, there is a joint there and we need to cover that up. And we use baseboard now for accent pieces. It also supports the style of the home. Very important part of the house. You know, 2,500 feet of casing and base in a home, moldings in a home, half of it goes to the floor and the wall.
There are also a lot of different pieces and parts sometimes that go into this base. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, we went from mop board to skirt board to baseboard. And you're right, a lot of the baseboards can be very interesting parts of the molding in the home. For example, we have the actual baseboard, that's kind of the part in the middle. And then on top of that could be the cap, the
Okay.
actual cap itself. And then at the bottom, again, we're at the bottom of the base and where the floor comes in, we have the molding, the base shoe molding. 3 parts.
So when we're looking at the bases, we can have a lot of different profiles, we can paint, we can stain, we can really design your house, and we can give you different architectural styles just by the base that goes around.
Come on in, let's talk about base trim.
Elizabeth just got done talking to Lonnie about all the base. Now let's talk about the casing.
There's a lot to talk about. Now, your casing refers to your trim or your molding that goes around a door, a window, or an opening.
Can also really help define your architectural style inside the home.
It sure can. It's a nice added touch. Now, when we're talking about a door, for example, there are 2 types of ways to do that trim. We have the tapered look. So this adds some visual interest because it tapers in. And this is going to taper to what we call a reveal. This is a small shadow line. You really don't even notice it's there, but adds a little extra visual interest. This is typically our colonial style trim or our clamshell trim that would have that taper.
And then we also have this style.
We also have the symmetrical, so you can see it's all the same. So not quite as much dimension when it comes to that.
Now there's also a lot of different styles when it comes to how they come together and how they joint together on the windows.
Yeah, it's common. We might see a miter joint when we're going around a window, a miter cut. We might have a butt joint. That's really popular when it comes to the craftsman style. There's also a butt joint with a reveal. So again, that adds a little more visual interest with that reveal.
And that can also help add shadow lines to the home, and it can really help define everything that we're trying to do that.
There's one other thing that you could see a lot of times. You'll see a corner block. So it's a little block on each side, and that could be a decorative piece there to add more interest.
I've seen some in circles. I've seen some really elaborate ones where they went into lion heads and so forth, actually in the corner pieces of those, and they really look beautiful. You see a lot of those in some of the older Victorian style homes.
You're right. Now there's a couple different ways when it comes to your window how you can trim or case that out.
There's 2 different primary ones. There's the picture framing, and when you're looking at the picture frame, all 4 sides of the window are going to be identical. And then there is the traditional style where you have 3 sides the same, but the bottom part's just a little bit different.
Yeah, so back to the picture frame, we've got the head casing, the leg casing, and the sill. And this is really common. We see this in a lot of new homes. With the traditional style, you've got the head casing, the leg, and then you have a stool, apron, and a horn, which adds a little more visual interest when it comes to the casing of that window. Now there are other things you can do with your trim on your head casing, whether it be above a door or a window. You can really beef up that head casing.
Right.
So what we can do is add some crown, we have some freeze board, and then a crosshead strip. And that is really a way to add some wow when it comes to your trim.
Elizabeth, I see a lot of times when you have a 10-foot ceiling, beefing up that head casing can really help you with the weight and the distribution and how the whole area looks.
And it just costs a couple $100. Kayla, one of my favorite things about the Granite Ridge Builders showroom is all of the trim profiles we have throughout our building. This is great because when homeowners come in to make their selections, they can see literally hundreds of different styles.
You're right, and what the profiles of your trim that you're going to select has to do with the style of the home you're building, which people don't necessarily understand that they have to do with each other a lot of times. If you have a specific style, the Trimworks says a lot about that style and the profile. So let's talk about a few popular ones here.
Sure, you were just holding one. This is a piece of crown molding, and on this one we have some readings. So
the one you have here is a little bit more Victorian, and the one that I have is considered more neoclassical, where it's fluted or channeled, where it kind of goes in a little bit. And this one here is showing on a casing. Again, you can do it on crown molding, casing. You can do it on applied moldings that are a little bit smaller as well.
now we have a lot of different profiles. What are probably the most popular profiles that you see right now?
You know, right now we do a lot of the traditional look here, so a little bit simpler than some of the ornate styles with the Victorian and neoclassical. The traditional is really really nice for stained woodwork, even painted. It makes a really nice accent for something like this. And this one here is a base board that I'm holding. But what we do too is this one here is called clamshell, where it's kind of rounded just at the top, but very simple. We're getting into a lot more simple details and accent pieces here. Now, besides the clamshell, I'd have to say the last very popular one that we do is what we call 1x. 1x6, 1x4, so they're getting smaller or larger. This again is a base profile. Now you could do something with a little bit of detail, a little bit of fluting at the top, or you can have it completely square and you can just have a squared off piece of trim, and there's a lot of different ways you can apply that to the house.
And the great thing about all of these is they come in a lot of different sizes. So the profiles, you can see there's quite a big difference. So we see a lot of 3 1/4, 4 1/4, even 5 1/4.
Exactly. You know, crown, my new favorite crown is 7 1/4, where we can get that nice built up look, but in a one piece. You don't have as many seams. It's absolutely gorgeous. And you can stack different profiles together to make the look that you're going for. You can add back banding, which we'll talk about in the show more too.
And this is important when you have a really large room. If you're going for a wow, you're going to want to do something more like this, a 5 1/4 or 6 1/4.
Absolutely. You know, the profile and the sizing says a lot all about your home.
Of course, no discussion about trim would be complete unless we talked about crown molding. And Luke, behind us here, we have some examples of crown molding. And when we talk about that, there's some Greek and Roman architecture terms that we would use to describe what the crown molding is actually made of. The very top of it is going to be called the cornice. The middle part, or usually typically a flat part, is going to be the frieze, and the bottom is going to be the architrave. And those three pieces are going to make up any kind of crown molding that you're going to see.
Yeah, and you'll see that, now that you know those terms, you'll see that possibly above doors, outside, and some exterior features like columns, for example. So those three terms really play a part in lots of parts of what we build. And the crown can do a lot for the interior of a house.
Yeah.
Now, we talked a lot about trim, baseboard, casing, that kind of stuff is pretty well found in every house, but not crown. Crown is something that you don't see in every house, except for a Granite Ridge house. You will see it in every single one of ours, and do you know where that is?
The bedroom?
Nope, our cabinets. Our cabinets come
Yes,
standard
yes, okay, of
with
course,
a
yes.
piece of crown on top of it. But when we go back to talking about what it can do for a room, you know, we talked about that we're putting trim in areas of transition or corner pieces. So you got the ceiling to the wall. That's where the crown typically ends up being applied, and it can do a lot for that empty box syndrome. It can make an 8-foot ceiling feel more like a 9-foot ceiling because it helps your eyes just roll from the wall surface to the ceiling surface. So it can do a lot for that room.
And you don't have to use crown molding throughout the entire home. You can really use it just to accent a couple of rooms. For $6 to $8 a linear foot, you can really make a huge difference in the appearance of your living spaces.
Yeah, and depending on the height of the ceiling, you could do a much larger piece of crown like you have there. There's different styles, like I got in my hand here. This is more of a dentile style, so you can see the little teeth that are in there, and that gives it more of that classic look.
Yeah. So crown molding is something that you're never going to be able to avoid seeing now, and we know a couple of the terms. Crown molding is definitely something you should consider in your next home.
So Izzy, behind us, right up where that corner is of that ceiling and that wall, that may look like one giant piece of crown like you have in your hand, but actually that is 3 pieces that we've taken, and it could be 2 pieces of base that maybe we attach to the ceiling and the wall, and then bridge that with a piece of crown. So we actually call that a built-up crown, and it can really, depending on how much you pull that piece of base in and out, it can really give it a sharp look and make it look like a real thick piece of crown up there.
Now, back in the 1900s, there were 2 pretty typical offerings that they would have. You could do monochromatic, which was just basically your trim, your wall color was pretty much the same color.
So white on white.
Exactly. Or you had traditional, which was probably a stained, and you would have something that a little bit different, like a stain here with a white wall. And that was about it. But here are the options we have now, and even more.
A lot has changed over the years because right now just about anything goes. We see it all. We see white on white. We see a bright wall color with a white trim, pretty much everything.
You know, I have to say that stain is definitely coming back. Paint has been popular for probably 10 or 15 years now, but stain is definitely making a comeback in the gray color. So everybody still loves the grays. We're lightening it up a little bit, but we still get this nice touch of gray stain. You can do that for just some accent pieces too. It doesn't have to be all of the woodwork in the house. It could be maybe just your mantle or just your stair parts, and you can mix and match painted and stain. That's probably one of my favorites.
It is one of my favorites too. And then we're seeing people take their interior doors and doing them a different color than their trim, just to add a little accent.
Exactly. We see a lot of black doors with white trim, or we talked about the casing sets before. We do a lot of white casing with interior. We talked about jambs with black jambs. So there are an endless amount of options when it comes to how to finish off the color of your trim.
Well, wallscaping is probably my favorite place to add your own touch of trim.
It's really important, and it creates a great unique accent in spaces where you have a lot of wall. So we're talking the foyers that have 17-foot ceilings, or we have the great rooms with 25, 30-foot long walls. Wall paneling is definitely the place to turn to.
I love that you can take a foyer and transform it. Maybe for $2,000, you can have shiplap or beadboard, something like that, and really add a pop as your guests come in the door.
And you can do this in all sorts of different styles. So we have wainscoting that you see behind us here. That's more of the mission style. We have the more one-by, very clean, crisp sort of a look. You can do wainscoting that's traditional, where you have applied moldings with a few little grooves and ovalos and chair rail on top. And the one thing to consider too is the height of the paneling.
Now, Kayla, when it comes to height, what do you recommend?
For the taller ceilings, so if you have a 9-foot tall ceiling or more, I definitely recommend the 5-foot, and it can depend on your style as well. If you have an 8-foot tall ceiling, you know, the 3, the 4-foot tall, it could be an option as well. It really just depends on how everything comes together. There's a lot of things to consider.
And with all of the options when it comes to beadboard, shiplap, picture paneling, wainscoting, there's a lot of ways to add extra pizzazz to your home.
Man, another great show. By the way, what are you doing, Tony?
I'm getting this green screen ready. That way we can all talk about our favorite houses and places that we've been that have some of the most ornate trim work.
I've got a favorite. 87 Forest of Foxwood. It was our Parade of Homes. It won all kinds of awards, I think primarily because of the trimscape in the house.
Yeah. You know, I was at a house southwest Allen County, and they had the most ornate trim throughout every place. It was beautiful.
But Tony, I think you can top that. Do you remember when we went through the Bass Mansion as an office and took that tour?
yeah.
That place
Cool.
is gorgeous.
Richardson Romanesque style. You know what? I think you've got a really
Yeah, guys, let's not forget, a lot of people think that the trim has to be made out of wood, but the Allen County Courthouse, which is a National Historical Landmark, has a lot of trim work made out of marble and stone,
right.
so
Right.
it's beautiful.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I just got done visiting the Falling Waters house that Frank Lloyd Wright built in Pennsylvania. The trim work on that was so unique. The teak wood, how he applied it and where he applied it was just amazing.
My favorite is the White House.
Oh,
It's
wow.
gorgeous. There's so much trim. And then even the Eisenhower building, which is on the White House grounds, so many beautiful trim details.
If you've ever been to Boston or New York or heck, all of Western Europe, the churches are so ornate, lots of wonderful trimscaping.
That's true.
You know, when I was little, I think in about 1st or 2nd grade, I got the chance to go to Austria, and the Schönbrunn Palace has to be my favorite, and I remember it from a little girl.
Well, I bet our audience has a lot of favorites too, but we're running out of time. So Jared, would you close?
Yeah, as always, guys, I want to thank you for spending part of your day with us. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about who we are, what we do, and why we do what we do so well, please just pick up the phone, give us a call, visit the website below, even better yet, come in any of our front doors, and we can talk trim for your new home.
Good.
Hey, you know what? I think we can actually do a tour of the courthouse yet today if we want to go back
mind
down there and
that.
take a look at that again.
I think this
Love
proves
the marble.
trimscaping is the place and what we do.
Now with shiplap, beadboard, picture paneling, there's just a lot of options to really add that extra oomph to your home.
Okay, we get that.